Good day and welcome to FDM, the channel dedicated to Ferra data models. I've shown you a couple of Ferra models the last couple of days, and last night I saw a similar thing done by Numberphile. But their outcome looks a bit different to mine, and the same on Wikipedia. If you look at the Wikipedia article on these type of models, you will see the outcome looks a bit different to mine, and this video really is to explain that. So I assume you've seen some of my previous videos, and I just want to explain why there's a difference between these models, these model outcomes. Okay, so in a previous video, everything I'm going to show you today I've shown you before, but we have this population of susceptibles that then gets infected, and the disease is transmitted to from the infected to the susceptibles. The susceptibles become part of the infected category, and then after some time they move to the recovered category. However, some of them don't make it and end up as fatalities in this category. So what's extremely important in these models is the contact rate. The contact rate is really the number of contacts that gets infected by people in the infectious category. So it's defined formally as the number of contacts times the probability of transmitting the disease. So let's say you get in contact with 10 people, there's a probability of transmitting it of 10%. So you have 10% times 10 is 1. Contact rate will be 1, and the disease is transmitted to one other individual. Now what I do in my simulations is I work with a contact rate per week. So I simulate on a weekly basis in these discrete time steps, and when I refer to contact rate, I really refer to the contact rate per week. That makes it really easy to understand, also makes it easy to simulate. When I then vary the contact rate, I vary these components, and I vary the number of contacts by doing from the Pareto and the probability of transmitting by doing from the beta distribution. So the number of contacts, I use a Pareto distribution, and the probability of transmitting, I use a beta. Make two random draws, multiply them together, that gives me a random contact rate. Now in later simulations I drop the beta. I only use the Pareto, and I use that to directly simulate the contact rate. It seemed the beta had little impact, and it simplified it. It also made it faster, and so in later videos I only use the Pareto to simulate the contact rate. These are my assumptions. I also discussed them in another video. Start with 100 million. I start with 10 million infected in 100 million population, and it's a category 3 pandemic. So my fatality rate is 0.75. Or opposite to that, you have a recovery rate of 99.25. That really defines these two ratios. Okay, so let's look at this. This is what you would have seen on Numberphile. It says, but this I didn't take from Numberphile. I got this copy and paste job from Wikipedia. If you look at the Wikipedia article, this is what you would see, and you would see the size of the infectious population increasing rapidly, increasing exponentially, and then really as the susceptible population falls, there's nobody left to infect, and this thing dies off slowly. Here you see the slow die off towards 0, and the reason it dies off slowly is because of this flattening also in the susceptible population, and this flattening out in the recoveries. Alright. Now this model is continuous. It's also continuous in time. So there's no definite unit of time. Time changes continuously, and you can zoom or stretch that out to fit on any time axis that you want, but you don't have this counting off of time. Rather, you have this progression, and for example, the the change in the recoveries is modeled as a fraction of the total infectious population. So you have the number of people that recover at a given point in time is equal to an instantaneous rate of the number of infections at that point in time. Okay. Now my simulations look quite a bit different. Here, for example, I use a contact rate of 1, and I also see this exponential increase, and then the thing peaks. But then, and I mentioned this and elaborated a little bit on this in the videos as well, this dies off even faster. There's this really interesting asymmetry in the size of the new infections, where you have this rapid increase, but then it dies off even faster. This is even more pronounced for a higher contact rate. So if you have a higher contact rate, it will seem like the end of the world here, but then the next day you will wake up and the disease would have disappeared. You have this extremely rapid drop in new infections, and the thing disappears overnight. Okay. Now let me go through my model equation by equation. So because mine's a discrete simulation, at the outset of each simulation round, if you want, I adjust the total population by the deceased, the newly deceased of the previous round. So at the outset, the population is adjusted by subtracting or removing out of it the fatalities. Then, depending on whether or not it's a simulation, I will simulate the contact rate using a Pareto, or I will just use a baseline contact rate. But here's where we really want to spend some time. The size of the susceptible population then is calculated as the total population less the infectious less the recovered. You can think of it, the total population looks like that after we've adjusted it for the deceased. It looks like that, and it's made up of these three classes. So the susceptible number really is the total less the infected less the recovered. That's what you see there. Now let's simulate the newly infected. My model is also a model in differences. You can think of this as the change in infected, or the difference in infected compared to the previous period. So here, what's happening is that the infectious, or the infected, interacts with a susceptible. That's what's modeled there. But it's not a one-on-one. The disease is carried to the susceptibles using the contact rate. So that's what's happening here. The newly infected is equal to the total infected times the total susceptibles adjusted by the contact rate, multiplied by the contact rate. And then you have this adjustment. This is adjusted for the total population. Now, I like to write it like this, where you see this interaction clearly. But another way to write it is to say that you have the total infectious multiplied by the contact rate multiplied by the total susceptibles adjusted for the total population, or divided by the total population. So I could also take that, total susceptibles, and divide it by the total population. That's because the ones in the infected category interact with the rest of the population through the contact rate. So they interact with everybody else, and let's say they transmit the disease to 10 people in the total population. However, of that 10, only, let's say, 5 are members of the susceptible population. So although the contact rate might be 10, I need to adjust that. I need to adjust that for the proportion that the susceptibles are of the total population at the moment. Okay, so I calculate the newly infected size, and then because this is a discrete simulation, numbers can easily go negative. So I need this correction. This is important. This really is necessary to make the model work. And it's the following. The newly infected cannot exceed the total susceptible population. So if I have a contact rate of 2, let's say, it's very easy to run into negative numbers where where if you go further down, you simulate maybe a negative recovery, a number of recovered people or something like that. So we need to correct it. And then here's probably the most important refinement in my model, and that is that I use this time period called time that you are ill, the till variable, if you want. In my case, I've assumed 3 weeks. So when I calculate the newly recovered and the newly deceased in this time period, I look back 3 weeks, and I take from the newly infected of 3 weeks ago. That's a newly infected of some time period ago, and that is used to calculate the recoveries in this period and the deceased in this time period. So if you want, here I look back. There, when I calculate the recovered, I don't look at the current number of infections. I look at the number of infections 3 weeks ago. And you see there's a rapid die-off. Okay? Here, everything happens instantaneously. You don't look back on this curve. When you get here, you don't look at a higher value sometime before, and the thing sort of slowly goes towards zero. Whereas here, I actually look back 3 weeks to when this number was much higher, and that is used to calculate the recoveries in this time period. Okay, so a couple of notes. It really is the same model. It's the same mathematics. The big difference is that the Numberphile simulation is continuous, while mine is discrete. I use weekly time frames. And because mine is discrete, I can make this a really important refinement, where I have a recovery time of 3 weeks. I don't have to simulate this instantaneous fraction of the infected that recovers. I can actually look back in time and take the number of infections 3 weeks ago and let them recover in this time frame. And that's important. When you simulate here in the middle, it's fine if you make approximations, or there will be little difference, I think, between the simulations. But in the tails, really, that's where you will pick up. Differences. For example, here, right from the outset, right from the word go, you will have a build-up in the recovered persons. Which is, of course, in practice you won't have that. In practice you need to go through the sickness and recovery period, and in mine your recovered will remain zero, and then start picking up after 3 weeks. And that's why I think that's behind the difference in outcome. And the difference really then is in the tails of this simulation. So let me go through this quickly. This is my simulation. You start off with 10 infected initially. You have 10 infected. They infect 10 new ones in the first week. So now you've got 20. Those 20 combine to infect 20 new ones in the next week. Now you've got 40, and that 40 combines to infect 40 new ones in the next week, and so on. The next week you have 80 new infections. And the next week, instead of that 80 going to 160, it goes to 160, but 10 recover. The first 10 now recovers, and they leak out of the system, if you want. And so I have new infections of 150. Next, that 150 goes to 300, but then 20 recovers. And then also you start seeing this creeping in. That's not 280, that's 279.999. That's because a fraction of the initial, of that 20, a fraction of that 20 were fatalities. So you see these fractions accumulating, and I think the next refinement will be to model this not fractionally as I've done, but to actually work with integers, if you want, with numbers that you can directly relate to people, because it makes a big difference. For example, if I look at South Africa, we are probably around here now in terms of the number of new infections. right? Now I started with 10. Let's say we start with 1. Then in the first week I've got 1, then 2, then 4, then 8. So I have a 4, and the 8 then is more or less equal to the 10 I started here with. So if I start this with 1, eventually it sort of catches up and will have pretty much the same trajectory as this one, but there's a 4-week lead period. And this will push it out by 4 weeks, which will take us to around about now. So if you want accurate information, you're going to have to simulate this, with, if you want real people, real units. You cannot have these fractions to really get accurate information or accurate simulations in terms of weeks and so on. So another very important refinement. In mine, I've used a Pareto distribution to add some randomness to the contact rate, and I've used a Pareto to simulate the outcome of the whole population. I think in practice, really, you need to have a Pareto for each sick individual and simulate that individually, and then add up all of that to get a more accurate outcome. And I found this on the internet from guys did this in the University of Lyon, it seems, where they calculate what the sum of Pareto distributions would be, and this is what they come up with. Now, if that doesn't scare you, then you are either Pareto himself or you've missed the argument. So I mean, I look at that and I say, no, this is good enough approximation. And I think this also is a good enough approximation. However, if you really want to zoom in on the tails and you really want to think about recovery and so on, then I think you need these kind of refinements. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this, and